Good afternoon. I might point out, just as a period on the last couple of talks, that tonight you'll have a chance to see a large super deep diamond at the Smithsonian. So, and it's a blue super deep diamond, in fact. Yeah, that's right. So you can even check out the boron if you want to. That's right. So this session is actually a nice transition into tonight's program, because the title of this session is Making Mineral Collections Relevant in the 21st Century. And being, when you're at the museum this evening, you'll see the public display. What you're not going to see is the 375,000 mineral specimens we have behind the scenes. And saying that, I'm relieved to hear that every talk I've heard today is talking about studying minerals, not just now, but it looks like into the future as well. So it sounds like minerals are going to stay relevant to the science of mineralogy, so we're kind of glad to hear that. We had a workshop at the Smithsonian last fall where we had many of the curators with large mineral collections from around the world address this very topic of what do we mean by keeping mineral collections relevant for the next 100 years. When you think most of the collections we have today have been assembled in the last 100 years by accumulation from various sources, by perhaps a few curators making decisions. And I think looking ahead, one of the questions we'd like to pose, and I think you might think about as you hear these talks, are how do we make these collections more relevant to science in the future? How do we build a partnership between the museums, curators like myself, and the scientists like you that are actually using these collections? I think in the future we have to be much better about building that kind of a partnership so you can help inform us how we should be spending the resources we have. I mean, keeping collections, curating them is not a cheap business. And one of the issues we're looking at is, will all these collections survive in the future? And the more we can make these collections available and relevant to the science of the future, obviously the more secure those collections will be, and hopefully the more valuable they'll be to all of you. So there'll be two different talks giving you sort of perspectives from two of the important collections in the world today. And then at the end of those talks, we'll have a chance to ask questions and discuss this topic. So the first talk is going to be by Kim Tait, who's the curator of the mineral collection and a mineralogist at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. And then the second talk following Kim will be done by Aaron Celestian. And Aaron is at the Los Angeles Museum of Natural History. And so Kim's title is Making Mineral Collections Relevant in the 21st Century. And then Aaron will follow with Unlocking the Collections, Making Minerals Accessible in the Next 100 Years.
So this is actually my end slide, so I guess I'll start there. We'll start in the end. So this guy on the right is a big deal in Canada. His name is Chris Hadfield. You might have heard of him, Canadian astronaut. And we have the Toronto International Film Festival that comes to Toronto each year. And we got a call from his publicist asking if he could take a piece of Martian meteorite with him to the TIFF. So we did. We gave it to Chris Hadfield's wife. We trusted her most. She had a purse and was able to carry this in. And this is perhaps you might have seen him before. Matt Damon holding the sample. I did not get to meet him, unfortunately. So yeah, I know. So we're just going to back up a little bit and go to the start. It's okay. It's okay. We can work with that. Here's my title slide. So before I start, I just wanted to, this is a fun day for us to sort of reflect on, maybe how we got to become mineralogists. I'd like to acknowledge two of my mentors that got me here. First is Frank Hawthorne. I was living in Winnipeg. That's where I was growing up at the time. And University of Manitoba was where I went for my education. And, as I finished my bachelor's, I started to think about where, apply for a master's degree, and I wound up interviewing a few places, and I went one place, and the person's in the room right now, I won't mention who it is, but we sat down and we talked about it, and he's like, why would you leave Winnipeg? You're with, one of the most preeminent mineralogists in the world, and I perhaps didn't really realize that at the time, but, there you go, and I'm glad to say that I was one of the only students that ever got him out into the field. That's him in the blue, and this is Cross Lake, Manitoba, where I did my master's degree, and after Bob Fergusonite was described, there was some mineral collectors went there and actually blew up a portion of the pegmatite. So the pegmatite was actually scattered all throughout the bushes there. And so the field collecting turned into Frank running and handing me stuff, saying, this one's really interesting, and me carrying all these rocks. So that was my experience with field collecting with Frank, but it was a really fun time. And then I wound up doing my PhD with Bob Downs, and Bob always spoke of all of us being related from our mentors and from our students. So Bob would be my mineralogical father, and Aaron, who'll be talking after me, will be my mineralogical brother, and then Bob Hazen would be grandpa. So and then if we go back far enough, all of us might be related. So it's a real honor to be speaking to my family right now. So. But really, sort of when you think of mineral collections and mineral museums, our public-facing component is a big part. Not only is it a great place to gather and have some beverages and food like this evening, but also it's our first chance to share the natural world with the general public and kids. And you never know how those relationships with minerals will affect people. Maybe you each have a story of going to a museum as a small child and experiencing looking at minerals. I've learned a lot. I was hired 2 months after a large gift came in to build a gallery, and so I hit the ground running, building my first gallery the first day that I showed up at the museum. Turns out they don't teach you how to do that in geology school. You guys can all attest to that. So I really had to learn a lot fast about lighting and about getting messages across. In Canada, we have to do everything in 2 languages. So trying to get messages across in 2 languages and not overwhelm people with information as well. But we do our best and we learn as we go. But what I've learned in my job is that mineral museum collections are a lot more than just the pretty gallery that we display the objects. As Jeff said, he has 375,000 minerals. I don't have that many in the back, but we do have a lot of specimens that are in the back for you, for the researchers in the room, for the researchers around the world to study, and that's a really big component of what we do. Support scholarly research. We loan and support to each other. We've borrowed stuff from the Smithsonian to display, and we also do share our materials around the world for display. Another big component we do is type repositories. Hopefully all of you are submitting minerals to museums for perpetuity and for future studies, and a really educational resource from everything from small children all the way through universities as well to support their research and their interests as well. But with that, there are a lot of challenges. Maybe not as many as I even anticipated when I took this job. Minerals are getting more expensive. There is absolutely no doubt about that. A lot of you, I know, go to Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. Every year it seems like there's another 0 on every mineral. It's just they're getting more and more expensive, and we have to maybe get a little creative on how we're going to build these collections and how we're going to sustain them and make sure that we do keep serving our role in the community to supply minerals. As every university, a lot of you probably can relate to this, is space issues, budgets are being cut. It's not just museums; it's a lot of our institutions as well. And for us, we're really there's only the best one, and probably see those tonight, not at my museum, but we're also for us, we're fighting with other collections within the museum for funding. And also, externally, there's other museums that are, other parts of the world that are certainly getting a lot of funding for minerals. So we have to do our best and, keep going. But, one of the biggest things, and I think all of you might have a story of this, is that university collections are starting to disappear. As budget cuts come, maybe the curator isn't replaced as they retire. And then also, some not even smaller museums anymore. Some of the bigger museums are also starting to disappear. A change in change in direction of the university or the area has just decided to pack everything up and move on. So we have some challenges ahead, but that's okay. We can, that's why we're here, and we're going to talk about it for sure. So, you know, one big thing that we're doing at our museum, and as Jeff alluded to, we got together, quite a lot of us, and started talking about what's happening in all of our museums. And one of them is really getting our collections online. And this is great. I mean, it's a great start. To get them online, they have to be databased, so that's wonderful, and we know that that information is with them. But quite frankly, you know, this is a, you know, sort of a top-down decision to do this. I don't think a lot of you are sitting on your computer scrolling through our websites trying to figure out which minerals you will have. We're going to just probably contact us directly and see if we have the mineral specimen that you're looking at. So we have to, you know, sort of decide who this audience is. I do get a lot of, you know, school groups that are working on, you know, rocks and minerals in Canada is introduced in grade 4, you know, so that's fantastic. If they would like to use our online resources to look at images and learn a little bit about them, fantastic. But, you know, we need to do a little bit more than that. You know, here's, you know, some examples of online access, which is, yeah, certainly, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. This is a great start, but, you know, we need to do some more. What I would argue, and Erin's going to talk about this a lot more, is, you know, we need to be really working on large integrated databases where we're all talking to each other, museum-wide around the world. You know, sadly, many large museums even don't even have a database, online database at all, you know. And then when we have databases coming online, everybody's using a different one and they're not talking to each other. And quite frankly, we're really falling behind our colleagues in the biological sciences. And again, Aaron's going to focus on that in his talk, but I just kind of want to stress this because it's really, really bad. You know, we could really help the research community, help all of you if, you know, you could just go somewhere and just, you have a mineral that you're really interested in, type it in and see which museums around the world have it instead of contacting all of us, you know, one by one and trying to find the mineral that you need. That's a waste of your time, and it's a waste, you know, I'm not saying it's a waste of our time, but it's, you know, there's more efficient ways of doing that. And, you know, also duplication of, you know, you might ask 30 different museums for the same sample and then you get 5 of them. And, you know, that's a lot of duplication of efforts as well. So there are some websites that have done a wonderful job of starting to fill in those holes. You know, Mindat, Rough are examples of that, but you know, I think they've stepped up because, you know, I think museums have really kind of fallen behind in that. And then there's going to be a talk tomorrow by my grandpa, by Dr. Bob Hazen, and you know, talking about you know, the role of mineral collections, or you know, the big data and big data studies, and certainly Ruff and Mindat have been assisting with that. But if the museums can get together and start supplying that information and coalescing it for these types of big studies, that would be really, really great. Now, you know, another thing that we could be really doing more of, and, you know, I kind of alluded to this before, is that we are repositories for Tait materials, which is a great start, and, you know, we need to be doing that more. You know, we need to be talking to you guys more about what studies you're working on, you know, where are these fantastic blue diamonds going, you know, and making sure that they're not lost for data, for studies in the future. And so, you know, certainly the museum can play, not what it already does, but it could play even a bigger role in repositories of your samples and of your materials. So, you know, we need to, I know your desks look like that, and, you know, maybe under those papers we can find some mineral specimens and some, you guys are all starting to giggle nervously. Yes, yeah, you know who I'm talking about, right? So, you know, certainly we need to be working more with you guys to make sure that this information is not lost and can be accessed for future generations, because we all have that story of that professor down the hall, not you guys, of course, but the professor down the hall that, you know, that might have retired and moved on and didn't keep good notes and all that stuff. So we need to really be encouraging that. Also working with mineral collectors as well. You know, we have as the prices go up, as the zeros are added, certainly really heavily aesthetic specimens are. We have some pro people here in the audience, so I thought I would give them some shout out there with their beautiful specimens. But these are heavily prepped, heavily prepped. Get rid of all that cruddy stuff on the sides, and get rid of this. But I mean, unfortunately, that's where some of the really good science comes from, right? Is that those little specimens that are on the side and on the edge. So, we as a museum community can really provide some of those specimens that do have those small bits that may have been overlooked 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, whatever it be for you to study. But also we need to be working with dealers to make sure that those associations are not lost. And can we work with dealers more, and maybe you guys can help us with those relationships with people that are actually pulling this stuff out of the ground, and say, you can sell the top 20, top 50 specimens, but is there something that is representative of that material that can be put in museums for future generations? Because these are time-sensitive materials. A life cycle of a mine is 10, 15 years, and then the stuff's gone. So we want to make sure that we are trying to grab representative materials, and not only just in one museum, but in many museums. So in our discussions, we called this responsible prepping, not this kind of prepping for the end of the world, but prepping for specimens for science as well. So I'm going to walk you through something that we've done at our museum, and maybe just as an example of a positive story of what we can be doing together. So this is a very typical looking museum storage. It's just the reality of it. We have a series of generations of cabinetry. These ones on the bottom here were actually from the gallery from the 1930s, and they would have had the vitrines on the top, so the mineral specimens were below and the display was on the top. These are, sort of circa 1980 when we moved into this building, and these are sort of metal cabinets. We were at capacity. We were absolutely full when I showed up. Not a great way to start your career. And we had stuff on top of things and everywhere, like just absolutely everywhere. And I certainly knew this was not sustainable. And of course, I asked, can I have more space? And they said no. Like that was just out of the question. We had built this little bubble. I don't know how else to describe it. And this is to put the sulfides in. This is not an uncommon problem with mineral collections, is that, well, especially in Toronto, we have huge fluctuations in temperature, and we have huge fluctuations in humidity as well. And over time, with these cycles, we have something called pyrite disease. So you can actually see on this specimen here, it's actually burned through the paper, and that's some sulfuric acid coming off the pyrite. And it basically attacks itself, right? It's the freeze-thaw kind of idea. It's not freeze-thaw, but you know what I mean. The specimen is actually sort of ripping apart, and once it starts, it's something that you can't really stop. So we did build this. It literally had a Sears dehumidifier in it when I arrived, and this plastic bubble of trying to keep the specimen sort of at a stable humidity. And I really thought that we could do better than that. And so we were coming up to our centenary at our museum, actually, and I got a call from this guy, and just kind of serendipitously around the same time. And he was retiring. His name was Doug Kerwin, and he was a VP of Ivanhoe Mines in Thailand, is where he lived. He was an Australian born, but living in Thailand. And he asked if I wanted to come see his collection. So I showed up, and he had a few things. He had mineral specimens literally everywhere. On the staircase going up, in the bathroom, like there was mineral specimens absolutely everywhere. But really, really fantastic stuff. I came back to my boss and I said, hey, I'd like to really get this collection. Is that okay? And he's like, okay, how much? It's 22,000 specimens, about 10 metric tons of material. And he's like, what are you, you're crazy. But he said, we kind of worked it out. If you can come up with a plan to be able to incorporate this material into your collection, go ahead. Which I think he thought there was absolutely no way. But we decided to try, and we came up with basically it was a $4 million fundraising campaign to to get that collection and to get brand new compact storage within our collection space. So this is what it looks like now. We have these compactors, so it's just like a library, effectively, having the big crank specimens in drawers in these sealed Viking cabinets, which is sort of the gold standard right now for mineral collections. Inert metals, so there's nothing that's going to be reacting with the minerals. And we actually built a sort of a dehumidifier area that's completely encased, so there is no big wild fluctuations in humidity. So the plastic is gone, and we have a nice space for all of our sulfides. What we also did too is we built a classroom just to make, again, things a little bit more accessible for people. If if you guys want to come over and hang out, you can come into our classroom. And we can bring in people, interest groups of people to come in and learn from the collections as well. So trying to bring people in, get people excited about the collections, and show them what we're up to. So I just want to show you a couple examples of, I get to show pretty pictures. That's the good part about being my job is here's some of the specimens that we acquired from the Kerwin collection. He was on the ground in some of these places that were literally pulling material out of, basically Myanmar was a big part of what his collection is. And, we had drawers and drawers of topaz crystals like this in their natural form, still with their price tags on them, just from when they were being pulled out. What we did is took one of the more beat up crystals and we gave it to a local gem cutter in Canada there and said, could you make something out of this? And absolutely. So we called it the Spirit of Callison, I think is how you pronounce it. And this is where his wife, Yulai, is from, in Thailand. And again, trying to find different ways to engage with the public. Maybe they're not necessarily interested in the minerals, but having something really beautifully cut into a gemstone might be another way to sort of engage with people. Now, another big thing we've been doing is trying to make sure that we're getting large endowments together for specimens. I think this is probably the best way to encourage collection growth in the future. So we had a bequest to the museum of $50 million Canadian to buy large objects, and so we've been really successful in the last sort of decade in getting some new specimens in. And I was dared to see if I could get a meteorite picture in at dinner last night, and I think I was successful. So just having a couple of examples of things we've purchased in the last little bit. So in general, I think we have to get, as curators and as mineral professionals, maybe in general, we need to get a little more creative on how we can keep these collections going and make sure that we are as relevant as we can, not only to you and to the researchers in the room, but also to the general public, and make sure, we've had some excellent examples of, from the first talks, talking about relevancy to general public, and the museum is a great place to have those conversations and making sure that people are understanding that some of these things are happening and that minerals are used. It's amazing how many people come into a mineral collection, into the gallery, and ask me how we made them. It's just people are completely clueless that the earth is so powerful in making these beautiful specimens, and we need to make sure that we're educating the general public as much as we can. We need to work with industry, and we need your help. Making sure that we're making these connections constantly with private donors, mineral collectors, partnerships with anybody that will help to make sure that we keep relevant and keep growing, and foster relationships with researchers. What's in your drawers? Come and make sure that those specimens don't get lost for all time. Make sure that they get deposited somewhere. We need to watch out for our own. If you hear stories of a regional museum closing, make sure that you're in contact with them or get them in contact with a museum nearby, and make sure that we're keeping those relationships with the dealers going to make sure that we're keeping those mineral associations so we can keep describing new minerals. So thank you very much.